Salve, my friends, and welcome back to part 2 of ranking famous Roman generals. If you haven't already watched part 1, make sure to do so. A link to that video will be in the description, but because this is a continuation, I figure we just jump right into the video. Our first general of episode 2, Decius. More commonly known as Trajan Decius, he was a general emperor during the crisis of the 3rd century. He held a variety of governorships, which allowed him to gain military experience. Eventually, he was given command on the Danube by Philip the Arab, and he was later sent to quell a rebellion in Moesia and Pannonia, and the rebellion was led by a usurper. He was successful in stopping this rebellion, and was claimed imperator by his troops. And then he actually, in a twist of fate, led his troops against Philip the Arab and defeated him. He was then declared emperor, and at this point, Decius went on a campaign against the Visigoths, who had pushed into the Balkan region of the empire, and he saw very little success early in the campaign, and eventually he worked to wage a large-scale battle, the Battle of Arbitrus, which resulted in not only his death, but also his son's death and the army's total destruction. Because of his early success on the Danube frontier, but this tremendous late failure in the Balkans, I'm not gonna really go too hard on him. His defeat wasn't nearly as bad as Crassus's, and for that reason, I'm thinking we give Decius C tier. Be a little bit kind to him, so we'll put him right up there. Alright, our next general, Fabius. He was a famous Roman general from the 3rd century BCE. His first notable military service was victory against the Ligurians, who he was able to drive back to the Alps. He got a triumph for this feat, and he later served as dictator during the Second Punic War. He is notable for his creation of the Fabian strategy during the dictatorship, and the Fabian strategy essentially entails avoiding a singular pitched battle to ensure no total defeat, and although he was not effective in driving Hannibal out, he did assure that Rome didn't suffer any major defeats. Now remember, this was right after the battles of the Trebia River and Lake Trasimene, which were both major defeats for the Romans, so their morale was definitely on the downside. And Mike Duncan, in his podcast, The History of Rome, really goes into this and talks about how, although Fabius didn't necessarily have many great military achievements, he did provide the people of Rome with the confidence that was necessary for pushing them forward during the rest of these wars. And as we saw later in the war, just I believe a year after Fabius was resigned from the office of dictator, the Battle of Cannae occurred, and that was obviously a tremendous Roman defeat, but because they had the confidence to push forward that they basically were able to gain under Fabius, they re-raised an army, and obviously the Carthaginians were pushed back to their own home turf and ended up getting defeated. Just a few more things about him. He finally conquered Tarentum in 209 BC before his death. He got another triumph for this. And as I mentioned before, while he didn't have any major military achievements, he did get Rome through their darkest state during the Punic Wars. And because of this more logistical victory, not necessarily a pure battle victory, I'm going to put him, I'm thinking in B tier. So I'm thinking right between Constantine and Anthony. Alright, our next general, Galerius. He was a Roman emperor general who was known for his campaigns against the Sasanian Empire, and he first served in the military under Aurelian and Probus. He served notably, as is mentioned in the Historia Augusta, I believe, but I'm not positive, so don't fact-check me on that. After becoming Caesar, he began his conquest of Persia, and was evidently successful as he was able to sack the capital city of Ctesiphon. He later campaigned against the Carpi on the north side of the Danube, and I'm not going to go into him much more just because there's nothing really notable other than those kind of feats. All that you really need to know about him is that he was a distinguished general who made a name for himself, and I don't think that I would necessarily put someone like Galerius with the likes of Camillus and Aurelian, but he was definitely a good general, a great tactician, not necessarily great tactician, but definitely a good tactician. So for this reason, I am going to put him in B tier. We're going to put him right below Fabius. Alright, our next general, Gallienus. After being made emperor by his adopted father during the mid-3rd century AD, he was given the duty of countering barbarian raids from the north. He did a great job at this, and he was able to repel them, at least temporarily. And during his period as a general, he dealt with an insane number of revolts and internal issues, and these definitely resulted in some heavy losses. His whole reign is really complicated and filled with rivals and problems, so I really don't want to get too into it, just because we have a lot of other generals to cover. All that you really need to know is that after repelling a good number of conspiracies and revolts, he was finally assassinated. He was a pretty decent general, and he had some really sucky circumstances, so the fact that he was able to command in at least a somewhat successful fashion during this period, I would say partially merits him as a pretty good general. So for this, I'm also going to give Gallienus B tier. And Gallienus, I'm thinking I'm actually going to put above Constantine. Okay, our next general, Germanicus. I would pretty confidently put Germanicus in A tier. Let's see where I want to put him. I'm thinking probably below Aemilianus. He was definitely a notable general and statesman, and in a very similar fashion to Caesar, he was known for having a real connection with his troops, and under his generalship, Rome basically stabilized the Rhine frontier, and he was definitely one of the most loved generals of all time. Some of the major rumors circulating about his assassination are that Tiberius and Livia actually conspired against him just because he was gaining so much popularity from the troops that they didn't want anyone who could have possibly caused a mutiny. He was really that great at communicating and being in a relationship with his troops. Again, I mentioned very similar to Caesar. If he very well could have became emperor if it weren't for a series of circumstances that occurred in the Julio-Claudian dynasty. I really don't want to get into it, but there's definitely a possibility that he could have become emperor. And I think that if he had become emperor, there's definitely a chance he could have been S tier. I really like him as a general. I really like the Julio-Claudian dynasty, so I kind of have some bias with generals from that period. But I definitely think that he merits at least A tier. Alright, next up, Heraclius, another Byzantine general. I'm definitely not going to rate him. Julian, he began his military career successfully while campaigning against the Alemanni and the Franks, had one or two major victories against them, which allowed him to repel them at least for the rest of his reign. He was made emperor after Constantius died, and he planned on an invasion of the Sasanian Empire soon after this. And he did have some early success and things were going quite well, but he was eventually defeated and died in battle. He had a decent initial career, nothing really too special, and obviously he died in battle partly due to his poor generalship and also poor logistical planning. So for this, I'm going to give him C tier. And yeah, I'm going to put him below Decius, I'm thinking. Alright, Lepidus, Roman general during the late Republic. He was a master of horse under Caesar's dictatorship and was very close with him. Didn't have an extremely active military career. He did get a triumph after quelling some rebellions in Spain and Africa. He was a member of the Second Triumvirate, but really didn't see much military action during this time. And after Augustus consolidated power, he was really reduced in both military and political power, so not really anything notable after the Principate began. Because he wasn't super significant and didn't really spend that much time as a general, I'm probably gonna also put him in C tier. Let's put him above Julian, but below Decius. I think. Alright, Lucullus. A very close friend of Sulla, served in the military pretty much non-stop for a period of 20 years. He first served as a military tribune in 89 BC, and then served as an officer under Sulla during the Social War. He conquered a ton of eastern kingdoms during the Third Mithridatic War, and he showed extraordinary generalship in a diverse series of situations and environments. One of my favorite examples of this is in the siege of Cyzicus, and for these reasons, his campaigns were studied by Roman generals as examples of excellent generalship for years in the early empire. And I would say that because of his constant success for this long period of time, and his legacy as such a notable general, I know a lot of historians spent a lot of time talking about him for one reason or another. I'm definitely going to give him A tier. So let's put him maybe. I don't know where I want to put. For now, let's keep him below Germanicus, but I have a feeling he's definitely going to move up eventually. Okay. Next general, Majorian. Majorian belonged to the military aristocracy of Rome, so he was pretty much destined to a life on the battlefield from a young age. He first served in Gaul, where he distinguished himself in defense of the city of Turinensis. I apologize for my pronunciation. After some drama with Valentinian that resulted in a temporary halt to his career, he returned to the army after the emperor's assassination. And eventually, when he became emperor, after a few other short ruling ones, he had to deal with the Alemanni and their takeover of Gaul. First, he had to stop them from getting into Italy, which he successfully did, and then he took back Gaul. He also stabilized Hispania, where there were some major uprisings, and all around he was a really good general and a super underrated emperor, in my opinion. And I would say his ability to deal with such tricky situations and be so victorious in them definitely merits A tier. Let's put him maybe below Lucullus. Or you know what? Now that we're kind of doing this, I think I'm going to move Lucullus up above Aemilianus. Maybe below. Okay, I'm happy with this. Next up, Marcus Aurelius. In my opinion, he was a fantastic commander and an even better emperor. A lot of time people focus on his philosophical and political achievements more than his military ones, but he was a very impressive general, and his ability to kind of stabilize the Roman Empire border on Germania, it was very impressive. One of the first major things that he did, logistical things that he did, was splitting the empire between him and Lucius Verus, which was an absolutely genius military strategy. It allowed him to focus on the problems in the west while Verus dealt with the east, and this basically allowed him and credited him with conquest on both fronts, even though he was really only focusing on a small portion of it. I would say, obviously, as I mentioned before, the pressure that was coming from Germania was extreme, and this, in combination with the Antonine Plague that ravished the armies and the cities and the borders with death, meant that conditions were insanely tough. So the fact that he was able to stabilize the region, at least temporarily, prevented any major invasions in the near future. The troops, in similar fashion to Germanicus and Caesar, also loved him, and I would say because of all this, I'm going to give him A tier again. Alright, Gaius Marius. No debate. S tier. His reorganization of the Roman army alone assured him this position, in my opinion. It's one of the major reasons that the empire lasted as long as it did. His great generalship was very clearly seen in his defense against the Cimbri and the Teutones, and even more so in the Civil War. I'm not going to go crazy in depth on him just because it's such an obvious position to put him in. In my opinion, he's quite literally one of the greatest Roman generals, and definitely one of the most influential generals in all of Roman history. So, yeah, S tier. Alright, Narses, another Byzantine general. I'm going to skip over him. And I actually think that is the whole video. So, I'm so happy that You guys liked episode 1 and are continuing on with the series. Very happy to see that you're enjoying the tier lists. Hopefully we'll be able to do more of this sort of thing in the future. And as always, I hope to see you again very, very soon. So next week will be part 3, and after that, look forward to some exciting and new content. I have a lot of fun stuff planned for the rest of the summer and the rest of the year. So I'll see you then.